What's going on, guys? It's Horse Beef here, and I'm bringing you another video, and we have a top 15 list today, and it's going to be covering the greatest fighters of all time based solely off of the resume of wins. So title defenses, all that shit out the window. It's all about who these particular fighters have beaten throughout their careers. So let's just get into it. And at number 15, I have Alexander Volkanovski. Now, the reason why it's at number 15 is because his resume is just very top heavy, right? The 3 wins against Max Holloway. Spoiler alert, Max is on the list, and so is Jose Aldo. So those 2 wins alone kind of puts him on this list by themselves, right? But then you have the Korean Zombie, which it was a bit past his prime, so it doesn't weigh up as strongly as Volk fans may like it to weigh up. But Brian Ortega, Yair Rodriguez, those are good wins. Chad Mendes, of course, I would say it's his 3rd best win, especially considering how much of a monster Chad Mendes was. He was just so unlucky to have to run into such animals like Jose Aldo and Volkanovski throughout his career. But yeah, I would say the resume is elite. It's just very, very top heavy. But I would say 4 wins in total over 2 of the greatest featherweights of all time, along with himself, right, propels him to be on this list in general. But I was kind of juggling between him, maybe Matt Hughes, maybe Frankie Edgar, maybe even Charles Oliveira. But I do think that those 4 wins against Aldo and Max Holloway respectively alone should put him on this list. So he's number 15. And then we have, who is to many the GOAT of MMA, but to me his resume is, like I said about Volkanovski, just a little bit too topic. Now there are some great names on there, like of course Mirko Cro Cop. Like beating him in his prime is an achievement in and of itself. 2 wins against Big Nog, massive ones. Renato Sobral, he's not the biggest name out there, but he's picked up some very, very impressive wins on his own. Mark Coleman at the time, of course, was great. Kevin Randleman getting slammed on his head and then coming back and winning via submission in that one. Mark Hunt, I guess, is a good win, depending on who you ask. But at the time, man, Mark Hunt was an animal. Tim Sylvia, Gary Goodridge. Ricardo Arona is another one similar to Renato Sobral, who's under the radar to many, but picked up some incredible wins. Like he has wins over like Dan Henderson and some serious individuals, and even the one against Andrei Arlovsky when Andrei Arlovsky was in his prime. He was an animal, right? Animalistic. Andrei Arlovsky knocked him out as Andrei went up for a flying knee or something. They caught him with a hook and knocked him out cold. It was nasty. But the Rampage Jackson win, it doesn't really age the best because he did it in Bellator when both guys were past their prime. So I mean, I guess it was an even playing field in that sense, but I still felt like Fedor Emelianenko had more in him at that point. So I don't know. To me, that win's not the most impressive, and I do think that when you really look at his resume objectively, it doesn't hold up as well as it could, and that's the reason why I have him down here at number 14. And at number 13, we have a spicy one in Hagar Musasi. Now, based off the resume alone, he is arguably an all-time great of MMA. Dan Henderson, Vitor Belfort, Chris Weidman, Thiago Santos, Lyoto Machida, Roy McDonald, Jacare Souza, Mark Hunt, Melvin Manhoof, Gary Goodridge, Douglas Lima. So those are multiple generations of fighters that he was beating, and greats from all these different generations and multiple different organizations as well, like Bellator, then the UFC, Pride. Everywhere he fought, he racked up an incredibly impressive resume of wins. And I feel like number 13 might even be underselling him a little bit, but that's where I have him. If you guys agree, let me know in the comment section below. But just look at that list right there, man. I know he never captured undisputed gold within the UFC, but like I said, this isn't based off of title wins or any sort of a title reign. This is only based off of resume of wins, and it's hard to get much better than Hagar Musasi right there. And at number 12, we have Jose Aldo, one of my personal favorites of all time. Now, I think his resume is extremely impressive, mainly down to the longevity of it and across the multiple different weight classes and generations of fighters. 2 wins against Frankie Edgar, 2 wins against Chad Mendes, a win against Uriah Faber, a Korean Zombie win, which is a more valid Korean Zombie win than Volkanovski's was, Kenny Florian, Cub Swanson, Renato Moicano, which it's aged pretty well, but it was at a different weight class, though. It was a weight class below what Moicano's fighting at currently. Marlon Vera, Rob Font, Pedro Munoz, and Jonathan Martinez. He's done so well. He's done so well to not tarnish his legacy, even after going on little skids and getting knocked out. He still comes back and looks like he's never left us, and he just does not look his age when he's in the octagon. He's picked up an incredible string of wins. And I just think it's the variety of wins that puts him above guys like Volkanovski. Like, yeah, I know Volk has a win over him, but that doesn't mean that his resume is better than Jose Aldo's. Jose has just put a much more impressive string of wins together throughout his career, and that is, like I said, down to the longevity and how long he's been fighting at the very highest level. So that is why Jose Aldo's not number 12. At number 11, we have Max Blessed Holloway. Now let's see, 2 wins over Jose Aldo alone. Incredible legacy wins to have on the resume. Justin Gaethje victory after being counted out to no end, really, leading up to the fight. Like, everyone seemed to be counting him out, so that kind of elevates the win. And it was against a Justin Gaethje who was on a tear, looking like the best version of himself, coming off a knockout victory over Dustin Poirier, and he goes out and dominates him for 24 minutes and 59 seconds, and then KOs him in the final second, which is crazy. Frankie Edgar, Charles Oliveira, which ages beautifully, but it was a much different version of Charles Oliveira to what we have now, so I guess you could take that one with a grain of salt. But as a name to have on the resume, it's a beautiful one. Anthony Pettis as well, Brian Ortega, Yair Rodriguez, Arnold Allen, Korean Zombie, even though that one, it's in a similar vein to the way that Volkanovski beat him, where he was a lot more chinny and way out of his prime at that point, so doesn't age beautifully. But Cub Swanson and Calvin Kattar, back when Calvin Kattar looked like he could be a potential like title challenger, and with all this talk about him being one of the best boxers in the UFC, Max Holloway goes in there and puts a fucking clinic on him. Jesus Christ, Max has put together an incredible string of victories and one of the best resumes in MMA history, in my humble opinion. So that's why he's at number 11. And then at number 10, we have one of my favorite fighters of all time, probably like my top 2. He's within my top 2, Dustin Poirier. So I'm very happy to represent him on this list here. 2 wins against Max Holloway, a win against Justin Gaethje, 2 wins against Conor McGregor, although take the second one with a grain of salt, of course, because the ankle break and all that, but it was looking like we were leaning towards a TKO at some point for Dustin Poirier. He just showed himself to be levels above Conor in that fight, right? Compared to the second one where Conor was piecing him up in the first, and then, Dustin Poirier figured him out and steamrolled him in the second. But then you have the win against Eddie Alvarez, Michael Chandler, Anthony Pettis, and that's a good win over Anthony Pettis. That's before Anthony Pettis was starting his downward spiral in the sport. Dan Hooker, Benoit Saint-Denis, Bobby Green, and Jim Miller. So the Bobby Green win, I think, ages pretty well. Jim Miller won too, and then Benoit Saint-Denis, it's on there just because he was being picked so heavily against Dustin Poirier for whatever reason. But he's still considered to be one of the bigger prospects at 155. So I still think that win is a great win to have on the record. Then he has other wins on top of that, but the list is just too long. He's been in the sport for so long. He's been knocking dudes' heads off for so long and within the UFC, and he's one of the all-time greats for me, man. And at 155, he's a top 3 for me. That's my personal opinion, and I think the resume alone kind of sets him apart from a lot of other fighters who have even picked up wins over him. And for me, Dustin Poirier is worthy of being a number 10. And then at number 9, we have Mauricio Shogun Rua, one of the most violent individuals to ever compete in MMA. Wins over Chuck Liddell, 2 wins over Alistair Overeem, 3 wins over Big Nog, although the third one was when both of them were out of their prime, and it was like towards the end of their UFC careers, and it was a split decision. So I mean, I guess, yeah, take that one with a grain of salt, but it's still 3 wins over Big Nog. Rampage Jackson, Lyoto Machida, Kevin Randleman, Mark Coleman, Forrest Griffin, Brandon Vera, and Ricardo Arona, as I said, with the Fedor Emelianenko segment. Ricardo Arona is a super underrated win. Same with Brandon Vera, considering he did very well within ONE FC after leaving the UFC. And that's nothing to scoff at, man. Like, ONE FC is a very serious organization, so I think that win in and of itself has aged pretty damn well. But the prime Shogun Rua violence days came when he was in Pride, and he was never a naturally big person either. And he was fighting guys like Kevin Randleman. That's insane to me. Like, seriously, man. Pride days were just a completely different beast. Fighters were seriously about that action, and it really was anywhere, anytime, anyone. These dudes exemplified that completely, and you can just see it in their records, and there's a reason why. Despite not being undefeated and having these perfect records, which everyone is striving for nowadays, they didn't pick their opponents carefully. They fought literally anybody, and that is to me what makes an all-time great, and that's what I respect, and that gets you a lot of points in my book. So Mauricio Shogun Rua, number 9, he beat some serious killers. And then at number 8, we have another example of a very, very deceiving record. Fabrizio Verdum has wins over Fedor Emelianenko, Cain Velasquez, Big Nog, Alistair Overeem, 2 over Bigfoot Silva, Alexander Gustafsson as well when Gus went up to heavyweight to try his hand there. Fabrizio made him tap. 2 over Gabriel Gonzaga, 2 over Travis Brown, which was a great win at the time. Mark Hunt and Brandon Vera, which as we've discussed has aged very, very well. Now I would say just the 2 wins respectively of Cain Velasquez and Fedor Emelianenko, those wins alone are almost enough to put you on this list, but then to compound that with those other incredible wins as well. Fabricio Verdum, despite not having the best record in the world, when he was picking up wins, against the very, very best. And he might have been the first one to actually beat Fedor Emelianenko when he was on that gigantic win streak that he went on. So, man, Fabricio Verdum, I know he doesn't have the best record in the world. I know he's not the best fighter of all time. But when it comes to resumes, you'd be hard-pressed to find a much more impressive one than his, man. And then at number 7, we have Dan Henderson, one of my favorites of all time. As I've said a few times in this list, I'm just happy to represent some of my favorites of all time that I think don't get enough representation on YouTube these days. Like when it comes to like the all-time great talk, I feel like people do skip over some of these older legends who competed in Pride, and it's just not right, man, because they're so legendary, put on some of the best fights of all time. But he has wins over Fedor Emelianenko. I think he was the next one to beat him after Fabricio Verdum did, I believe, or was it the next one to beat him? Shogun 2 times, Vanderlei Silva, Big Nog, Vitor Belfort, Renato Sobral, which is a great win. He himself has wins over Robbie Lawler and Shogun Rua. So, you know, Renato Sobral is another one that kind of goes under the radar. It's a great win. Rich Franklin and Michael Bisping. So I think that Dan Henderson is one of the all-time greats when it comes to just title fights as well, man. Multiple-time champion in Pride. The dude was an absolute animal in his prime. I love me some Dan Henderson. The guy would just sling leather and has an all-timer record. And when you take a look at it, the dude has beaten some of the all-time greats, multiple champions. And he is more than deserving of being number 7 on this list. And then we have the piss drinker himself at number 6. And when I was kind of arranging where I was going to list each individual fighter, I couldn't believe that I couldn't help but put Lyoto Machida at number 6. Like I never considered him to be greater than a lot of these dudes that he was competing with around that time. But when you look at the resume, it's hard to actually argue. And I'm not saying he's greater as an all-timer, right? Because title reign has to come into play when it comes to the all-time great debate. But when it comes to resume and names on the resume, he has one of the most stacked ones of all time. Dan Henderson, Shogun Rua, Tito Ortiz, Rashad Evans, Randy Couture, Vitor Belfort finished a good few of those too. Hagar Musasi, who's on this list, respectively. Ryan Bader, BJ Penn, but they were very different in size. Lyoto Machida was much bigger than BJ for this fight, but still to have the name BJ Penn on your record, along with all these other killers and legends of the sport, Rich Franklin, Stephan Bonner, and the list goes on too, man. Lyoto Machida, he's so underrated, even by me, myself, like before doing my research for this video, because I've been watching Lyoto Machida for a long time, but I guess I forgot really until I really took a second look and realized, holy shit, man, Lyoto Machida is really one of these all-time greats of the sport and has one of the best resumes of all time. And yeah, I think number 6 is a very fair placement for him. There's an argument that he maybe should be a little bit lower, but you just can't deny those names. And that list is, for me, very much worthy of number 6. And then at number 5, we probably have my favorite heavyweight of all time in JDS, man. Dude's picked up wins over Stipe Miocic, Mirko Cro Cop, Fabricio Verdum, Shane Carwin, Cain Velasquez, Frank Mir, Derek Lewis, Tai Tuivasa, before Tai Tuivasa was a flop, right? This was the first loss that Tai Tuivasa ever picked up, and that was against JDS. Ben Rothwell, when Ben Rothwell was on a tear as well. Roy Nelson, Gabriel Gonzaga. He's beaten the who's who of heavyweight. Some of the best heavyweights of all time have fallen prey to JDS. Some of the best hands in heavyweight history. I know it's off topic, but man, his hands were just so crisp for such a big man like that. And he was a serious force. For me, one of the best heavyweights of all time. And I mean, really, you don't have to look much more past the resume, but he also did carry a belt as well. So when we're talking about all-time greats, JDS ranks up there with heavyweights. And when it comes to resume, he's arguably, depending on how you stack him up compared to the next couple of heavyweights that are coming up on this list, you could even say he's the best. But for me, he's just not worthy of being above guys like, I don't want to spoil it, but you'll see who's next on this list. But for now, we got JDS at number 5. And at number 4, we got Stipe Miocic. And the reason why I have him above Junior Dos Santos is because, well, he does have a win over JDS, and JDS has a win over Cain Velasquez, which Stipe Miocic does not, right? So he has a win over another all-time great heavyweight, which Stipe doesn't, but Stipe has 2 wins over Daniel Cormier. And arguably, Daniel Cormier is above Cain Velasquez in the all-time heavyweight rankings anyway. So for me, it puts him above. And then you have that win over Francis Ngannou, and as well a win against Fabricio Verdum right there, Alistair Overeem, Mark Hunt, Andrei Arlovsky, Roy Nelson, and Gabriel Gonzaga. But it is a little bit top-heavy when you think about it. But I would say that the 2 over Cormier, the 1 against JDS, Francis Ngannou, and Fabricio Verdum, those wins alone are enough to put Stipe Miocic at number 4. He, for me, is the greatest heavyweight of all time, and his resume only really strengthens that claim. And we're getting into the top 3 now, and the first one up is Daniel Cormier, and what a list of wins he's picked up throughout his career. Anderson Silva, I know it's not like a peak win against Anderson Silva because it was a short notice fighting against Anderson Silva, where Anderson took the fight as a late replacement and went up to 205. So it's not the best win against him, but it wasn't a washed version of Anderson Silva either, and it was still a pretty competitive fight at times. I believe Anderson even hurt him to the body at one point in there too. But also went over Stipe Miocic. 2 finishes over Anthony Johnson when Anthony was just running through the division, knocking out everyone left, right, and center, knocking out guys like Glover Teixeira and Alexander Gustafsson. Speaking of Gustafsson, DC beat a prime Gustafsson, which was a great fight, by the way. Ragdoll Dan Henderson. Beat Frank Mir, Bigfoot Silva, Roy Nelson, Derek Lewis, who I don't really rate that much, but he has the most knockouts in heavyweight history, so it's worth a mention, right? And then Volkan Ozdemir's a nice little supplemental win in there too, and he beat him when Volkan looked like he was the next one up, worthy of a title shot, so he deserved to be there. And DC made very, very easy work of him. He's one of the greatest of all time, man. And the resume does speak volumes to that as well. So Daniel Cormier, number 3 on this list, one of the greatest of all time. And number 2 on this list, we have George St Pierre. Now, when I was weighing up my GOAT discussion there, I did actually put GSP as the greatest of all time. But when it comes to the resume argument, he's just behind the number 1 spot. And at this point, I'm sure you guys can all predict who exactly is number 1, but for me, George St Pierre is just behind, man. But 2 wins over BJ Penn, 2 wins over Matt Hughes. For me, Matt Hughes is the second greatest welterweight of all time, even ahead of guys like Kamaru Usman, Michael Bisping, John Fitch, who was on a 17-fight win streak going into the fight against GSP, and he dominated him. Juiced up Johnny Hendricks, Nick Diaz, Carlos Condit, Jake Shields, who has an incredible resume in and of itself. I actually thought about putting Jake Shields on this list. I know he's not really a fan favorite, but when you look at the wins he's picked up, the dude is arguably deserving of being, like, if this is like a top 20 resumes of all time list, then Jake Shields may have actually made it on this. Juiced up Thiago Alves, man. Prime Thiago Alves was a scary man. Dan Hardy, Josh Koscheck twice, Sean Shirk, Caro Parisian. Those names are crazy. During that time, these were all the best of the best, and GSP beat all of them. Almost all of them were in dominant fashion. I know that he did face some adversity against Johnny Hendricks. Carlos Condit dropped him and all that, but for the most part, these fights and these performances were super dominant against the best fighters that were around at that time. And I believe his resume ages extremely well, and he's one of the greatest of all time, and this resume just only further cements that. Now, the number 1 spot is the obvious pick, which is Jon Bones Jones. Now, I think he's despicable. I think he's deplorable. I think he's every other synonym that makes sense in this scenario. I think he's all of that, right? He is every synonym you could think about applies to Jon Jones. I think he's just a crappy human being, and he's shown it with his behavior, with his cheating, right? The testing positive. I don't care about picograms, this and that. I don't care. I think it's all a cover-up, and I think there's a massive asterisk on his career. But when we're talking about the greatest resumes of all time, we have to talk about the tangibles. And the tangible fact is that he has the greatest resume of all time. In fact, I had to shorten everyone's name. I was going first and last name for everyone else's list, but for Jon Jones, I just had to go last name, or in the case of DC, the abbreviation there. So Daniel Cormier, Shogun Rua, Lyoto Machida, Belfort, which was TRT Belfort. TRT Belfort was a different animal. You know, took Bisping's eye, knocked out Dan Henderson with a head kick, wheel kicked Luke Rockhold, right, coming into that fight against Jon Jones, and almost broke Jon Jones' arm, and Jones ended up submitting him in that one with an Americana, if I remember correctly. Rampage Jackson, Rashad Evans. We cleaned out that entire generation of fighters pretty much. I think the only one he didn't get to fight was Dan Henderson. Beat Gustafsson 2 times. Right, the first one was razor thin. Arguably, Gustafsson should have got the win in that one, but then he proved it in the second fight, man. Just completely dominated him. Beat Ryan Bader when Ryan Bader was undefeated. Absolutely dominated Teixeira during his rise at 205 when he was knocking everyone out left, right, and center. It looked like the boogeyman. And then Jon Jones proceeded to stand in the pocket with him, essentially play his game and dominate him for the entirety of that fight. And like some of his lower level wins, even like Brandon Vera, Chael Sonnen. I think Chael Sonnen's probably his worst win. Stephan Bonner, Cyril Gahn made easy work of him to claim the heavyweight title. Dominic Reyes, which was a robbery 100%, but it's still a decent name on the resume. Thiago Santos, which was arguably way too close considering Santos had no knees in that fight. And then Anthony Smith, which it hasn't aged well, but at the time he did deserve to be in that position, I guess. So really, when you think about it, no one else deserves to be above Jon Jones. I mean, if this was a decent human list, then Jon Jones would not even be anywhere near it. But we're talking about the greatest resumes of all time, and unfortunately, Jon Jones has to be number one. There's really no argument against it, so that is the list, everyone. And let me know in the comments what you thought about the video, where you would place each fighter on this particular list, or who you would take out and replace with anyone else who I didn't include on the list. If you think I'm a filthy casual, whatever your thoughts are, just let me know, and any video ideas that you would want me to cover, let me know in the comments. And you guys know I read every comment, reply to as many as I possibly can, or as many as I feel are worthy of being replied to, which are the vast majority of your comments, generally speaking. So guys, as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.